Wonderful. All right, folks, we're going to get started. Want to thank everybody for being here. So good afternoon to all of our alumni, our parents, faculty, and staff joining us today. I'm Mike Mercia, Prep's Alumni Director, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all to our second virtual speaker series session. We kicked off just last week with Mr. Jack Campion. But today, we're joined by two Prep alumni who've both made an incredible impact on our community and paved the way for alumni over the last 3 decades. Jack Raslowsky graduated from Prep in 1979 and returned as a faculty member in 1985, teaching science, health, and a senior elective, issues in science and technology. From 1992 to 2003, Jack served as Prep's first lay principal. And for the last 11 years, he served as Xavier High School's first lay president. Jack's work as Prep principal marked a decade of innovation for Prep, a decade that included expansions of Prep's advancement placement courses, exchange programs with Jesuit schools in Italy and France, the development of lacrosse and volleyball programs at Prep, and the growth of our campus through the Keys to the Future and Carpe Diem campaigns. And now a member of Prep's class of 1983, John Irvine serves today as Prep's Director of Admissions and Director of the HAP program. And over the span of 35 plus years, John's growth within our community is evident in the many roles he's taken on. HAP teacher in 1987, English department teacher in 1989, HAP director in the summer of 1994, and admissions director in 2002. With those roles under his belt, it's no surprise Mr. Irving was the first Prep face many young alumni saw when entering HAP the summer after 7th grade or at a Prep open house during the 8th grade year. His work at Prep knows no limits, from inspiring HAP tutors to seek the magis and be student leaders, to inspiring his colleagues to display enthusiasm and cura personalis in their everyday work. I'll let both speakers explain how one helped the other find his way back home to Prep, but it's fair to share their common foundation, Prep soccer. Coach Raslowsky and Coach Irving both spent a considerable amount of time leading varsity and JV soccer to a number of accolades, championships, and even Prep Athletic Hall of Fame inductions. Now, I've taken up enough time introducing them. Before they speak, I'd like to let all our viewers know that a Q&A will open at the conclusion of their talk. If you'd like to ask a question, I'd ask you simply send a message in the chat indicating that you'd like to speak. I'll call on each person one by one in order to avoid confusion. You're also welcome to submit your question ahead of time in case you're unable to mute yourself. And without further ado, Mr. Raslowsky, Mr. Irving, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Well, I'll start. I had said to Mike Mercia that I kind of envisioned this to be a bit like a podcast, similar to the one that Barack Obama and Bruce Springsteen recently did. And since Jack is a president, I guess that would make me the rock star. Right. And initially I was worried. I said to fill an hour would be quite the task. But then I remembered I was paired with Jack, and so I really just have to fill about 3.5 minutes. I thought we'd start, and I thought I would ask Jack maybe to begin with, how you came back to Prep. What brought you back as a teacher? What went into that? What made that decision easy for you? Where were you before that? And then I'll follow up with the same.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. And this is the most prepared John's been for anything in the decades I've known him. So I'm almost speechless based on that. He sent me the first email. He asked questions and a way to proceed. We used to show up at soccer camp, and after he was head coach, and then he turned to me and said, "Well, what are we doing for the week?" And thank God I knew the question was coming. So John, thanks for the preparation today. Mike, thanks for the invitation, and thanks to folks for being here. I'm not sure I have a whole lot to say that people haven't heard, but I am always delighted to be back at Prep, whether that's virtually or in reality on Grand and Warren, because I really think I'm my best self there, and I'm my best self because of folks on this line and on this call, and whatever success, and I can speak for John as well as myself, whatever success we've had at Prep, right, is really the success that we have had together. I look at the names here, and whether it's classmate, whether I think back, I just had great classmates. I love that class of '79, and Joe and Greg and so many others have always been just so supportive of my work and St. Peter's, and I hope in some way they've felt that as well. And I see Charlie and Sandy and Charlie's leadership as board chair and friends through the generations, with Paul here and Ed Gargiulo's there, those 87 and 89 soccer guys will always have a deep place in my heart. And that goes on to really, sort of stories of everyone here, seeing Bill Price, Les Williams, and Think of the Boys, and all sorts of moments that of great meaning, right? That invited me into my best self. So thanks for taking some time tonight, and thanks for the journey together through the years. It really has been a terrific blessing. And to say nothing, I give Tony as much grief as I can, because everybody else says such nice things about him most of the time. But someone who's been there, right? I think for Charlie and for Greg and so many here, right? I walked into Tony's class in 1975, homeroom 1A, when 1A still meant something, and that the story continues to this day. And I'm glad Jim Horan made it home and didn't crash the car. Coach, I was a little worried, but I had to wait a few years. I had to wait until 1978 till I walked into Jim's classroom, also in the English building as well, though. So to go to John's question and to prove John's point about he only has to speak for 3.5 minutes, and I haven't even gotten to the question, and I'm still going. Now
I'm down to 2.
There was no grand plan. I finished school. I thought I'd go off to medical school, not unlike some of my classmates. But given how Joe Popovich ended up, it's probably good that I didn't end up in medical school. Greg, you can tell Pop I said that. I was looking for a job. I talked to John Browning, who was principal then, and he said, "Well, how long do you think you'd stay?" He says, "I have a science opening," but I said, "Maybe I'll stay for the year. I'm not sure what's next." And said, "Well, that doesn't really work." And he passed my name to the nun, to Sister Felicia at St. Anthony's. And I got a call out of the blue. "Do you want to be the chemistry and physics teacher?" Not do you want to interview, right? They would take any warm body. And I qualified in July of 1983. I was a warm body, and lo and behold, the job was mine at a grand salary of $10,000 a year. I got extra for being the science teacher. And so that was, it gave me enough money in my check to buy the alumni game t-shirts at Stan Sports Center in Hoboken. And my check was like $136, and the 24 alumni t-shirts for the first alumni game there, I think were $129. So I had about $6 left that week, and it was a good week. But then from St. Anthony's, started coaching at Prep, and which was great fun. And I had Nino's brother Renee was playing back then, and then 2 years later ended up on the faculty, and so the story goes. And you, John, I think I'm supposed to end with that.
Excellent. Yeah, for me, it's similar, and it's not hyperbole. And for any of my former freshman English students, right? Hyperbole, not hyperbole to bust my chops. But to say that I wouldn't be here, I wouldn't be at Prep if it were not for Jack. I transferred from Rider to St. Peter's, and in spring of 1985, I got a call on the phone from Jack. Really didn't know Jack except from meeting him at alumni games. And he said, "Oh, I heard from John Mullen that you're back in the area. Would you be interested in coaching soccer?" And I knew that my college career, my soccer career wasn't going anywhere. So I said, absolutely. And so he said, "Would you like to coach JV or be an assistant varsity coach?" I said, "If I coach JV, is it my team?" And he said, "It is." And so I took that offer. And so that kind of led to, my love then of coaching led to an interest in teaching. There aren't too many careers that allow you to do both. And so suddenly I went from a passion of possibly being a sports writer to saying, I think I'd like to teach. So started loading up on education classes, and again, following in Jack's footsteps. In May of my senior year, I got an offer to teach at St. Anthony's. And so taught there for 2 years. After my first year, I actually interviewed at St. Peter's Prep, didn't get hired, was crushed, went back to St. Anthony's for a second year. And then after that, I was hired at Prep. And unbeknownst to most, I was only hired to teach at Prep for a year. I was replacing Rick Rowley, who was on sabbatical. And so I was only guaranteed that year, and Rick was coming back. And so it was going to be, what will I do after that? And so some folks came to my aide, Jim Horan, saying, we'll create an alumni director's position, and you could do that. It'll keep you in the building. But a spot did open up. I was able to continue teaching English, and the rest, as they say, is history. Flash forward to 2002, Jack comes to me and says, hey, we're going to create this position, the director of admissions. And the plan is to have a faculty member step in, do it for 3 years, and then rotate out. And then, we'll do that on a kind of a continuing basis. So 19 years later, my 3-year commitment to being director of admissions continues. Funny though, Jack said to me shortly after that, hey, don't think we're going to hang out and just be buddies if you're a director of admissions, because I'm leaving next year. And so I only had Jack with me for 1 year, but still here at Prep.
That wasn't the first time I did that to you.
For sure. And to echo what Jack said, the connections are great. Even just looking at the folks who are here. So many times I'll meet someone, now a grown man usually, and they'll say, oh, Mr. Irvine. And I try to quickly go through the Rolodex to say, is he a HAP student? Is he someone I taught? Was he somebody I coached? Is it a student I interviewed to come in here as a student at St. Peter's? So just, the relations, as we all know, go so far and wide. And it's Prep, really, it is Prep for life.
I just had to do a double take. I'm saying, when did Nick Hamilton change his name? But I figured it out. So kind of getting that right.
I'm here. Sorry, I'm late. Do I go to Jug now, or what happens?
If you behave yourself, we'll let you off.
Run 3 laps.
John, speak a bit, because in some sense you've been doing this admission stuff so long, and you really did, I think, some great work in the classroom. I mean, I guess 2 pieces. When you think about your teaching, how does that connect to the work you're doing now? And beyond teaching about hyperbole or simile and metaphors or other such things, what were your hopes? What was you trying to do when you were teaching beyond the specific material?
I love teaching, and it kind of hit me a few years ago when my time in admissions surpassed my years teaching. So I've now been doing admissions longer than I've been teaching, and that kind of struck me. But I love laughing with my students. I love making them laugh. Funny story, when I moved from the English building to Burke Hall, B217, after my first day there, B. Wysocki, who some of you will remember, came into my room at the end of the day and said, there's a lot of laughter coming from your room. And I said, well, I like making the guys laugh. They laugh at me. We just have a good time. She said, well, things are a little different over here. We like to teach with our doors open in Burke Hall. And I looked at her and said, well, there goes the neighborhood. And she never visited my class again. But I think, what I wanted to teach the students or get across to them was really what was taught to me by probably Jack Casey and Rich Kennedy was a love of reading, a love of reading and a love of writing, not to dislike those because they were assignments or things that we had to do, but to find books that the guys would want to read, that would want to read beyond the assigned chapters for the night, would want to talk about it, at recess or at lunchtime, and then would want to find that author and go and read something, on their own time. And the same thing with writing. I learned kind of early on about, building up the students. And that came from coaching, trying to, never take a guy off the field after he makes a mistake, but let him play through it and then talk to him afterwards. And the same thing with writing, trying not to fill papers with, with a lot of red ink, but to find the positive things to tell them so that writing didn't become a chore, something that they could be proud of and be excited about. So really thank Jack Casey and Rich Kennedy, two prep legends who I was so lucky to come back and then teach alongside, in the later years.
John, were there things that you most enjoyed teaching?
Ooh, that's tough. There are a lot. I think for freshmen, if any of my freshman students, Eyes of the Dragon, which was a Stephen King novel, and I loved it because the guys loved it, and also because there wasn't a movie. So they actually had to read it. They couldn't cut to the video to get a leg up. And then I think in terms of assignments, when I was teaching sophomores in transcendentalism, I used to do an assignment called Irvine's Day of Difference. And the assignment was for the students to find a way that they would be completely different from every other student in the school. So they had to come up with something. They'd have to write about it ahead of time, get approval from me. And I used to tell them that what they were doing could get them jugged. I couldn't guarantee a free pass. And so they would then figure out what they were going to do. And students came up with some of the most incredibly amazing and creative ways of doing it. One student sang all of his responses during the day in every class. One student walked backwards all day. Another student wore makeup. And some guys did things very subtly. One student wore his shoes on the wrong feet so that no one would really notice that he was completely different. And then they followed up with a paper just on what their experience was. How were they treated? How do they feel to either be very different and be noticed, called out for it, or to be very different and not even be noticed? And I got some of probably the best papers I've ever gotten from students based on that assignment.
That's great.
How about yourself? You had the little time even doing the African American lit, right? Jumping in.
I did. That was the class which, never mind. I was about to pass along Jack Campion's comment when I started teaching that. That would not be, well, that was the fun thing about being principal, right? I could teach what I want and no one would say no. So we had a good run of various things in those days. African American Lit. I reprised Tony's prayer class when he wasn't teaching it. It may have been, I don't know why he wasn't teaching it, but I had the prayer class for a couple of years, which was remembering our own time together, my time with Tony senior year. In the Stillness is the Dancing was the name of our prayer class back then. So it was great fun. In many ways, those years when John and I were prepping earlier today, those faculty years were just great fun. I love being principal. That was terrific. It was a great honor. But I taught mostly freshmen, right? And I did that senior class in part in later years, so I could get some of those guys back, right? That I had as freshmen. I see Dom here, and Dom, thanks so much for joining. But freshmen were great fun, and it was never the science was fine, but the reality is no one was or not many of those guys were going off and living and dying on how protons, neutrons, and electrons behaved, and but trying to get some sense of how do I understand the world, how can I engage this in some sense, how can I own this, and even freshman health, right? I mean, there was a year where I had every freshman for health, which, with all due respect to Greg Boyle, was a step up, since Greg was not necessarily so, or Bob Z. Those guys were not terribly comfortable with some of these discussions, and we used the "What's Happening to My Body" book for boys. Some will remember that, and we always had a conversation with parents before we started health class about what we'd be getting into, and I just delighted in welcoming guys to St. Peter's and to beginning that sort of adventure learning and taking learning seriously and having fun doing it. Whether it was, the 100th monkey phenomena and, how does science work, or it was freshman health. It was really a delight, really a delight.
Talk a little bit about the transition of, I mean, for us, it's kind of, we get to peek behind the curtain, so to speak, coming back and working alongside colleagues who taught us, which is kind of intimidating to be sure, especially the Jesuits. But for you to come back and then at a point be their boss, what was that like?
Yeah, it was, it in some sense, it was almost a little more daunting coming back like you as sort of young faculty member, right? And 23 years old, and a lot of the guys that I had and Greg had and Joe had and others had were there, right? And whether it's Bob McGinnis or Jack Casey or Tom O'Connor or a host of other folks, and Tony was still enjoying life in Africa, so that I didn't have to negotiate that. Coming back as principal, it was fine. In some sense, I was too young and too stupid to sort of know that it wasn't fine. I was 30 years old. I think for a lot of folks, the fact that I wasn't a Jesuit was sort of the news story. The bigger news story, and some of the Jesuits reminded me of this, was that, Ed Dolan, God rest his soul, when the notice went up on the Jesuit community bulletin board that I would be the next principal, Ed's, in as only Ed could, said, oh, and a child shall lead us. And the poor Ed passed away 3 days into my time as principal. May he rest in peace. But I think that age piece, I wasn't, I wouldn't have described myself as brash, but I didn't realize that, I should have been scared to death of doing this, right? And thankfully I wasn't. People were good to me, and people were very, very kind to me. I remember John Browning coming in and saying, listen, I've been in that seat. People can be a real pain in the neck. And so whatever you need from me, you just let me know. I'll do whatever you want me to do. I don't care. Whatever you want me to do. And, that was really beyond kind, of John, who I had in sophomore religion in 1976, 77. It was religion honors in those days. No more religion honors. I might've been the last crew, but, and others were kind. Rich Kennedy would make a yearly pilgrimage. He'd schedule one meeting a year to tell me what he thought we had to fix. And that ran the gamut from, we need to get rid of styrofoam cups. They're not good for the environment, to a host of other things, right? And other folks who just, really had my back, Carl Di Lorenzo, don't try telling Carl, like, I knew I was smart enough to know Carl's going to do whatever the hell he wanted to do anyway. So don't worry about that. But, he had my back. Jim Moran had my back. So if there were sort of bumps, right, there were lots of folks to count on there. So it really was just, my interest in being principal is to say, I thought we had a great faculty, right? And how do we help a great faculty do great work, right? In some sense, whether that's resources, whether that's support, whether that's challenging in ways that invite them to be their best selves. That was the interest in being principal. And really people consistently, with their own personalities and their own quirks, delivered that. And I think that was the great grace, right? Because there were characters in those days, right? There were characters. And, and everyone from Jack Campion to Bean Fran to Harry Dammer to, I remember, and Jim Horan will remember, there were those Friday evening parent meetings and social activities afterwards that went far into the night, and some we can't necessarily repeat in on public fora like this. Particularly, I noticed Mike is recording this, so I will not repeat it. But there were things that would not happen in schools now that I'm glad they happened, and I was glad to be there for them. Joe Galliestro, others, God bless them. So, John, what about segue a bit, right? You know, the coaching, right? John Mullen gets the credit, you know, says to me, call John Irvine. I remember standing there and making that call, and it's one of the best calls I've ever made for me personally, and, you know, and for prep. So much of your work has been, you know, has been working with those guys, and right, the longest serving soccer coach, one of the longest serving coaches we've had, right? You know, and really, not to inflate you. Your sister would yell at me for this, but you know, really, in terms of your work there, it rivals, you know, the work of others. You know, whether it's Rich Hansen or whether it's Jerry Halligan or, you know, Bill Cochran or others. How the coaching? What does that mean? How did that all fit with the rest of this?
Well, I'm definitely not in any sentence with those guys. But
Hansen would tell us that, but the other guys, you know, aren't around to argue.
But yeah, soccer and teaching just went hand in hand. Soccer for me, what was teaching, you know, finding, you know, when we first started, and you know this, Jack, we didn't have to make cuts. You know, we were teaching students how to take a throw in. Kids who would stand up and try to throw with one hand and just say, no, this is how it's done. To come, you know, so far to have 50 guys come out to try out as freshmen and then unfortunately have to make cuts. But it was always about the teaching, always about the teachable moments, whether it was a lesson. And for me, it was the bigger picture. The guys remember, and, you know, Nick, Joe, they remember the wins and losses, those guys. But when they come back, they talk about other stories. They talk about the friendships that they've made, those lessons that they've learned, those things that they remember from camp or a van ride, to or from practice or a game. And that's probably, you know, the most important things that we could impart to any one of our athletes. Much more than win. Wins are nice. And I was probably the biggest sore loser in my early days as a coach, but I learned not to take it personally. You know, that it's a bigger picture. And I think that went a long way towards our success and the success of the program. And Josh Jantis, I couldn't be prouder to have a former player of mine, you know, at the helm now and doing a phenomenal job. You know, he's gonna, you know, break my coaching wins record, you know, in the not too distant future, and nothing could make me prouder. But also those connections, being at weddings of, you know, former players, having former players that I consider now my closest friends is an amazing thing to think of. You would never think of that when you're just standing on the sideline, or, you know, telling Joe Batista to run laps because he was, you know, back talking, you know, one extra time, had to get in that final word. And now to think that Joe's probably one of my closest friends, and that's a great thing. And it all started with that phone call.
You owe me.
For you, how tough was it giving up soccer, walking away?
You know, it's a funny thing, right? I do think that's some of the best work I've done, right? You know, to take the story full circle. So we were doing college visits with Rachel. Rachel is our youngest of four this weekend. And we started last week in California, and we went from California to Boulder, Colorado, to Madison, Wisconsin, to Burlington, Vermont. And I did, when I was in Burlington, Vermont, pay tribute to the folks at St. Mike's over in Winooski, Vermont, remembering Paul Lagramasini in all his glory, and M. Brian Cummings of the great class of '82, and again, and who gave us our tour at the University of Vermont? Greg Stupinski's two daughters. Greg's class of '89. Right, played for me for 4 years. Started, you know, from his first game freshman year, a 5-1 loss to Emerson, and he scored the goal. right? For freshman, first varsity game, 13 years old, the old Roosevelt Stadium. We got our butts kicked. I can see him putting the ball in at the left post, right inside the post, inside of his foot. That was the victory of the day. The freshman can score, and went from there. We that group had a great run. Ed Gargiulo and Joe Kelly and other guys. So and there was a streak there of those 89 guys. The first 8 guys who got married, I was at their wedding, and that was, like you said, that's just a great blessing. So for me, I may have been certainly in the top 5 worst soccer players ever at St. Peter's Prep, right? Greg can vouch for this. I wasn't winning any athletic awards, during my time at St. Peter's as a student. I wasn't coming near that. And
Jack, I will second that.
Thank you, Greg. It's good to have the truth verified. And
well, if you're cutting on Father Azzato, I got to cut on you. No one says a bad thing about you.
But part of it, I spent so damn much time on the sideline on the soccer field. I had to learn something about coaching, right?
No question.
And watching Ron Prezioso and Connie Gallagher and others. But it was about how are we building community, right? The soccer was a way to do that, and for players to support one another and to be part of a team and to stand with one another and say it's bigger than the game. The game's great. The game's beautiful. We want to play that well, but it's bigger than that. We can pray together. We can go to Broadway plays together. We can have Christmas parties together, and really enter into one another's life. And that all, when I got that right. It's when I got the lessons Tony taught right. There were times I didn't get that right, where I was a raging lunatic on the sideline. I never abandoned, let me be clear, I never abandoned my parents. There was once John's father was misbehaving on the sideline, and John disowned him and said to the ref, I don't know who he is. But
Out context.
Not really. What did I get wrong there?
No, yeah, actually quite accurate.
But I did step in and deal with it. So there were times I didn't always get it right. But when I got it right, it was just it was a great gift. I hope you give something to the team, but it was a great gift to me. So was it tough walking away? On one level, yes. On another level, you were there. I had great faith in you. So it's a lot easier if you can do that with confidence. And in all honesty, I was probably too attached to some of those years who had gone. So I had a little lull with 91 coming, so I could escape, or 90, the class of 91.
I always said my toughest day of the year was the day of cuts. And I used to try to tell the guys before we made the cuts that they were still part of something so big. They were still part of prep and all that the school had to offer. So although they weren't going to be on the soccer team, they still had so much to look forward to during their next 4 years at prep. And I used to tell the assistant coaches, Brian McCabe, Matt Klarman, Foster Moore, Matt Klarman, like just imagine for a second if soccer had been taken away from you, like what would your life be like? And to a man, they'd be like, oh, I don't want to think about that. Let's not think about that. And then come to admissions time, completely different, because as we make decisions on students, I realize that those students, it's kind of like cut day, but they don't have prep. Like we are literally changing their lives. So those, not making the soccer team changes a guy's life. He's still part of prep, and maybe he goes to cross country, maybe he becomes a basketball star, maybe he goes to student council or play. When we, decide that someone isn't a good fit for prep, we really are changing their lives.
There's never anyone we cut that became a basketball star.
Track stars, though.
Track stars, yes.
Some of the best cross country runners in prep history were.
Didn't we cut some of the Salmons, or both of the Salmons?
I believe so. Brian Lang, Sal Candela. you know, the list goes on. So some great runners.
If Indiana would have went out, you would have cut him before he even started.
In fact, John, I think you're in the Athletic Hall of Fame, not for your connection with soccer, but your connection to cross country.
You know, as a general manager of cross country.
Hey, Greg, remember that it was Alex Corrado that got me to the soccer team sophomore year. How scary is that?
That's very scary. But Jack, I gotta teach you one lesson in athletics. And this is a saying that you need to use. The older you get, the better you were. So you're getting better each year. Okay, that's because people don't remember the stats. They don't remember anything. So you can say that you was honorable mention all county, you know, when you're 60, whatever, and no one's going to question it. So you get better as you get older.
Oh, if we reprise this in a few years, I'm going to use that.
You have to. Yeah, you have to take it and run with it.
Jack, just to say, people have said that your greatest moment was 9/11, and the way you handled that. You want to say something about your memories of that?
Sure. Thanks, Tony. And I think that there's a kindness to people saying that, right? I somewhat jokingly say, yeah, I was so friggin' awful the rest of the time that you had to have one highlight of your time as principal, and mine comes at great tragedy. But I think, you know, it had less to do with me and really a lot more to do with prep at its best, right? And you know, you were right there beside me. You know, of course, I would always worry about Tony having, you know, a case of cereal in his office and other such things. But when we were bedding folks down after 9/11 in the in the cafeteria, Tony had plenty of food to make him breakfast the next morning. But we think of, you know, think of that day, right? And I had none of us had any clear sense of what was happening. I was in the first admin meeting of the year, me and Jim Keenan and Pat Reedy and Ken Dandorf and Ken or Jim Collins. In all honesty, no, it was Ken at that point. And you know, plane hit that, and who knew what was going on. And then before long, all hell was breaking loose, right? Of kids whose parents were working in the trade center, and you know, and the towers collapsing, and boats bringing folks over, and literally pandemonium in downtown Jersey City, right? And you know, and it was really just trying to say, okay, we will get through this together, and I think we did. You know, I remember asking you were my research assistant, coming up with the scripture for the prayer that afternoon. You know, from Lamentations, you know, something to the effect of, I look east and see disaster, and I look west and see disaster, and north and south, and the same thing. And yet, right, of folks stepping up, right? You know, I tell the story of Joe Batista, you know, meeting me at St. Stephen's in Kearney for the funeral of one of the alums we lost. You know, and he was a young kid at that point, and showing up because he said, well, you know, it's the right thing to do. He's a prep guy. And so many folks being present for one another, being supportive, you know, showing up, right? In one form or another, people showed up. So and we got through it. You know, we got through it. I think they're trying to witness to, in the face of difficulty and evil and tragedy, to try to witness to something good, you know, and something that's life-giving and supportive. You know, one of the neatest things that sort of goes, it may go unseen or unremembered, you know, after those initial days, after we buried the dead and walked with folks, right? And then it's, you know, what's next? And and we gathered for months, right? Once the military response began, we gathered for months praying for peace in the lobby at 8 o'clock in the morning. We did these prayer services every morning. It's a little, in some sense, it was. It'll bring Wes back to the early days, and it was like guitar masses and with the whole band singing, and some days we'd have 80, 90 people there, and faculty members sharing reflections, and we prayed for those who died, and we prayed for peace, and we prayed for the country, and we prayed for the church, and really powerful, and it was, sort of us at our best as a faith community, right? And, saying that this stuff is real, right? It's not just, the faith piece of the puzzle is not just nice. It's not just, window dressing. It really is part of who we were and who we are. And I think that sustained us, right? So yeah, if I did my part, but it was one part of lots of folks doing their part, and and when I think of, again, right, I always had had those soccer relationships through through my days as principal, and I remember soccer guys just going to hunt down freshmen whose parents were there to pick them up, and it's everybody stepped up, and and even we had all these people. We had about 23, 24 folks that we received, and Mike DeMarco and his wife, Tony will remember this, came over that night. It's 9 o'clock at night, and they're saying, "Oh, you don't want to stay in the cafeteria? Come home with us." And we were left. Truth be told, we were left with about 3 people. One woman we couldn't get rid of for months. I think Tony and she had a little thing going on there. Nothing that involved his vows. But the DeMarcos, right? Stepped up, and it wasn't Mike. It was his wife. Mike did his part as he often would. But that sort of summarized the day, right? Of we do our part, and everybody else is going to do theirs. So yeah. It was they were, through the tragedy, graced times as well. Mike, time for questions?
Yes. We'll open up the floor now for a Q&A. Anyone who would like to ask a question, you could either enter it in the chat or just let me know in the chat that you want to ask a question. We'll open it up now. Yeah, it's open to anyone. All right, Paul Agamassini looks like he has a question.
Yeah, hey Jack and John, I'm not sure how your technology skills are. If you look in the chat room, I sent you a pretty funny picture that you might remember.
Mike is not letting me open it. My technology skills are not terribly good. I just tried to open it. Paul, I'm going to send you my email. I can probably get.
All right, it's a picture of the entire class of '87, as well as some guys from '88 at Camp Green Lane that Corneli sent me a few months ago.
Can't go wrong with Camp Green Lane.
Yes.
Oh,
we still joke about that camp to this day.
That was
we
the
thought,
death
we
camp.
thought that was luxury, Paul. We were paying $12.50 a day for Camp Green Lane. It was the most economical, and we got everything we paid for.
Mike, I think somebody else had a question, so I'm going to mute myself.
John, there's a question from Wes Williams about our hopes for prep. Why don't you go first?
Sure. Just hope going forward. My biggest concern is always that prep will be affordable for anyone who wants to be here, and I think that it's probably been a concern since prep opened, and tuition was probably just a few dollars. But that's probably my hope, is that prep will always be available to any student who wants to be here and has the academic abilities to be here. Right now enrollment is great. going forward. It looks like things will be great, and we're heading in the right direction in so many ways. Great stewardship here at so many levels. But I just, always hate to think that there's a student out there who would want to be here and could be here and should be here, but can't be here because of cost.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and I mean, I certainly share that desire and that hope. For me, so much of that my experience of prep is a relational experience, right? It embedded in the fact that by and large, and I have to be honest, right? The different experience where folks are. It was when I was a student, it was hit and miss in terms of the academic rigor, depending on who you had, right? I didn't have a bad teacher in 4 years. I had classmates who, the folks they had were good guys, but we would sit around doing Latin translation, in the in the cafeteria, and they would translate the first line, and then the rest of it would be them, making up stories, often sexual stories about, traipsing the Alps with elephants and what went on with the elephants, because their Latin teacher only read the first line of their translation, so you get the first line right, you get an A, and you read the rest of it, boy, and it was a fine bit of creative writing, right? And other such things. So recognizing that in a lot of ways, right? I think the more you move forward, through the decades, from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s to the 2000s, I think in some ways there's been a growth of academic rigor. But that having been said, I always thought we got the school stuff right. I got a great education there. And I didn't have a bad teacher there. From Tom Murray to Tony Zardo to Jim Horan to Rich DiClemente to Bob McGinnis to Charlie Rooney, and I had some of those legendary guys, right? Father Kavanaugh and Harry Apito and others, and so the academics we got right, but we also got right the relational piece, right? And I think of our conversation tonight, right? Of whether it's player coach, whether it's teacher student, right? Shaped by people's love and care for others, right? That's not language I would have ever used when I was a student, right? It probably isn't even language I would have used as a teacher. I think I did come to awareness of that, but the faculty loved us, and in our own ways, we loved them back, or we played that forward. And some of that is, people letting you into their lives, right? Where they don't have to let you in at moments of weakness and difficulty and complication, and others entering, right? I look through and how many, of folks here, right? How many funerals we've been at together, that piece, I don't take that for granted, right? So I think my hope is that prep continues to be a place where folks feel deeply loved, and whether they use that language or not, and return that, right? Return that. That's been the gift. I think that's fundamental to Jesuit education. John O'Malley talks about that, talks about the relationships between teachers and students. My hope is that continues and continues in wonderful ways.
Thanks, Jack. We have a question from Sandy Leza. Let me just see. I don't see her on the call anymore. I do see Charlie. All right, while we wait for her, Nick Hamilton has a question as well.
What's up, Jack, John? It's good to see you all. Spend some time. So you talked earlier, and Jack and John can talk about this. I can see we have Joe and Sean, I think, is still on. You talked a lot about leadership during 9/11. Obviously, the last year and a half, we've had a 9/11 on many days, or most days, right? It's been a very difficult time. How do your leadership lessons of what you learned during 9/11, John, whether coaching our soccer team and keeping us positive, keeping us together, or Jack, you leading prep, translated to you and your leading prep or leading Xavier over the last year and a half? Just curious in your perspective.
Thanks, Nick. John, why don't you give it a shot?
It's been an interesting year for sure, Nick. And one of the things, and Jack has touched on this several times, is the connections, the personal connections, and that's really what makes the prep experience the prep experience. And that's been so hard to recapture over the last year when students aren't on campus or teachers are just seeing them via a video screen. So that's been the toughest thing. We had freshmen back now. This week, we just brought our freshmen back for 4 days. And so there are some boys, it's been their first day on campus. And so walking around with their schedules in their hands as they would, September 10th, trying to find their way to Latin class. And so for those students, what have they missed in this year where clubs weren't necessarily meeting? Some teams had abbreviated schedules, and the connections, as Jack said, that love for teacher to student, student to teacher, pretty tough to take place when the student and the teacher are on video screens. So trying somehow to recapture that and to make up for lost time come September when we're all back on campus.
I was getting lost in the picture Lagrassini sent me because it's on an angle, so I had to turn my head. Nick, it's a funny beast. This was, I think I'm pretty good at crisis in general. There were lessons learned. One thing I missed at 9/11, I was so focused on getting students back to some sense of normalcy and, let's get them in the building and let's show folks very clearly that life goes on and there's a value to stability and there's a value to being together and processing things and praying things. That the thing I missed in 9/11 were the needs of the adults in the community. I just was not nearly as attuned to that in the beginning as I needed to be. And it took me a little while to sort of come around to that and say, how do we meet the needs of the faculty as they're processing this grief and this trauma themselves, and then dealing with students and families who are dealing with grief and trauma and uncertainty. So I've tried to learn from that. And I think on one level, I've been conscious of that through the COVID-19 piece. Although again, I was also reminded that I should have been more conscious of it. Right, I should have learned that 9/11 lesson better. That having been said, this was very different, right? And leading a school during COVID-19, because there were things that I knew with certainty during 9/11, right? The evil and the horror of the attack, the goodness of folks, the fact that the sun will come up tomorrow and we will find a way forward. Did I know that here that we get through the pandemic? And yeah, I knew that, but sense of time and how and what this means and how so many things were unmoored. It has been a different beast. It's always dangerous to compare tragedies, and I know none of us want to engage in that, but it has been a very, very different beast. So I think for me, I think the thing was how do we remain hopeful, right? How do we remain hopeful when it's the same day after day, and how is that hope anchored in our faith, right? Because it was easy for folks, I think, to just be dragged down by this, at least at Xavier, to be dragged down by it and not to be able to move forward. So it wasn't a Pollyannishness, but it was a sense, we're anchored in who we are as people of faith, and we are an Easter people, and that needs to mean something in how we live.
Thanks, Jack. Sandy's back.
Hi.
Sandy.
So my question is, have the students changed from 2000 to now? Academically, with their faith, has social media changed the persona? How are the kids different?
That's a great question. Our Dean of Students has me talk to the freshmen each year about character. And I tell them, going back to when I was a student, and even going back 20 years ago, it was different. We accepted a lot more students. We brought them in, and then kind of the strong survived. We would weed them out. And as some of the older alums will remember, the first day of school being told, hey, look to your left and look to your right because one of you isn't graduating. So a third of the class would be gone possibly by the time senior year rolled around. And it's changed very differently, where we're much more selective at the front end, so that we keep students. We get guys who are a good fit, buy into what we're about, and then our attrition rate has all but disappeared, because most of the students who come in with us, unless they move or are transferring for another reason, do graduate. So we get students of good character, certainly very good academic students, but that other piece, that social piece, that's really the wild card. How they handle themselves in social media is completely different, and so many of them just don't get the message that what you put out there is out there forever. And our dean does a great job trying to instill that message, but many of them just don't seem to get it. Similar for you, Jack, across the river?
Yeah, I do think, Sandy, I think it's a great question as well. In some sense, adolescent boys are adolescent boys. And, Rich Hansen used to remind me that they can do wonderful things, and pardon my language, they can be selfish bastards. And I think there's something true to that, right? The adolescent boys will do wonderful things. They'll surprise you with their goodness and joy and wonder. And left to their own devices, some of them will do really stupid things and occasionally selfish things, right? That there may be a constancy to that through the years. I think there's as much goodness in the kids I have coming in each year now at Xavier, and the kids I know at St. Peter's, and even the kids at Regis that I've spent time with, right? There's a goodness there, and there are, again, in Ignatian terms, holy desires that they have. I do think the tech and the social media is a challenge that I wish we weren't dealing with. And I think it is a challenge we need to engage with more constructively with kids. I think it does change the nature of community, not always in good ways. So I think that is a challenge. And boy, there is a certain addiction to it. John and I are the worst ones to talk to, because my cell phone's never on. And I don't think John can take a text on his version of the cell phone. But you see it in kids, right? There's a real attachment to this, and I think the attachment interferes with their being present, right? And the presence is such a big piece of the puzzle.
Okay, and then there's one last question here from Dominic Esposito. He asked for John, what's your secret for getting kids like him who only really loved math to learn how to write well? And for Jack, can you revisit his freshman science grade?
So I'll go first, Dominic. It's like Horrendous said to me on my athletic career. The way I remember it, you got 100, and I'll swear to that. John.
That sounds good to me.
And that's funny. And, in terms of writing and teaching, one of the things that I learned from Carl DiLorenzo early on was you have to be the show. At that time, it was TV and video games were taking guys' attention. And so he said, you have to be more entertaining than what else they have to offer. And so you need to be, you need to make them want to listen to everything that you say. And so we tried to do that, sometimes with funny lines, sometimes with just being goofy. And in terms of writing, really the secret was not to try to tackle everything in a paper, to just take small bites, one or two things. Let's see if we can't conquer that so that there's never a mistake with a comma in your next paper. And that was a win, and just taking it step by step. So it wasn't like, hey, let's correct everything in every paper. But Dom, you didn't have too many bad grades. So,
It's funny. You just talking about that, John. My daughter here, she's just about to turn 8. And we've been working on her writing during this COVID thing at home sometimes. And she goes, just like me, taking one thing at a time. So clearly I learned something for you way back then, and you transferred as much as I can to her, second grade writing.
Excellent. I guess that was the level I was working at the time. So it worked. And I guess we had writing lab too back then. That was a course, as I recall. I don't know if anyone here had writing lab, but I think that was a 2-year stint.
Joe Batista has a question for you both.
Hi guys, this was awesome. Thanks for taking the time to do this. I'm lucky enough to call you both friends. And just really fast, before I get into my question, for everybody here, John and Jack mentioned about the soccer program. I was lucky enough to be a part of it. John mentioned how you're changing someone's life. I can truly say that did. But also, it was the leadership aspect that you both, and Brian McCabe and Josh, exemplified. Not only were you a prep man, but you were a prep soccer man. And you held yourself a certain way, whether around campus or just around your hometown. If you're wearing a prep soccer jacket around, you wanted to make sure, because of the way you guys taught us, you need to make sure that you act a certain way in the right way. From there, I'm going to pivot off to my question. For me, a kid from Kearney, my parents didn't, I made my sacraments. My parents didn't force me to go to church. I really came into my own spiritually with my faith when I got to prep, and reflection and just opening up a little bit more, whether as a student, as a faculty member, as a coach. How did that change for you guys during your time at Grandin Moore?
You mean our own spiritual lives?
Yeah, like for me, it really opened me up. But I don't know if, I went to public school my whole life. I don't, for growing up in Hoboken, growing up in Jersey City, did it help to change your faith, your spirituality?
I mean, for me, I was Catholic school all the way through, but it was very strict. The nuns were scary, and mass was more about the ceremony. I was an altar server, and when I got to prep, it was a different experience. Mass was great. Music was great, and the homilies related to us, Tony quoting movies that we had just seen that week. And suddenly it was pretty cool. And prayer became an important part of my life. Freshman year had Tony as a religion teacher, then he bolted for Africa, leaving me high and dry afterwards. But he and John Mullen, teaching me how to pray, that it was okay just to have it as a conversation, and it didn't have to be, saying the rosary or reciting, our fathers. And that took me to a different level. And then by the time I was a senior, suddenly learning about discernment would never have meant anything to me in my younger years. But then, what it meant to discern, what it meant to really think about decisions. And that sticks with me to this day. And it, certainly impacted decisions with coaching, with teaching, now in admissions. Every decision, becomes important. And I'm not, ashamed to say I pray on it. And I pray on it and pray on those decisions often. And it's a great thing. And without prep, probably would not have happened, Joe.
John, you missed the part. Tony always used to say to me, it was because he had you freshman year that he left for Africa. I would in a lot of ways echo what John said. I think it was my nuns weren't scary. I was only in Catholic school for 7th and 8th grade, but I did have the nuns in CCD, and they were not scary. But it was I think prep opened doors to a depth of faith, that reflection piece, right, which we didn't talk about in explicit ways in those days. And I don't think anyone used a discernment language in 4 years in the 70s, right? There was not an explicitness to the Jesuit Ignatian piece of the work that there is now, right? And there are lots of reasons for that. But it was very much there, and it was there in religion class with Tony and John Browning and Frank Stroud, God rest his soul, and Tony again, and it was there in other places, right? It was there in art, with Mr. Argelin. It was there in English class and in different ways. And the retreat program was a nascent program when I was there, right? Emma started in my sophomore, junior year. I didn't go anywhere near the program, right? So some of those pieces of the puzzle that opened doors for guys, in the 80s and beyond were just very different and just not there. But there was a sense of we are in relationship with God. God will deal directly with us, and vice versa, and that was a gift, right? There was a real, it was okay, right? Whether, I don't know whether I'd use the language that it was cool, but it was okay, right? It was good. It was, the value was recognized across the board, and nobody argued with that, right? And not only that's even a negative language to put it. There was a great invitation to enter in. Right, a great invitation to enter in to a deeper relationship with faith, a deeper relationship with God, a deeper understanding of church that was very clear and even more clear looking back to that. So I think I began as a student at Prep in a good place with my faith life, but that only just deepened in wonderful ways. And was witnessed to in wonderful ways, right? That I'm going to end here. I think it's a good question. I'm going to end. So any other questions got to go to John. But I can anytime I can pull in Hopkins, right, from my English 3 honors class with Tony. But it really was a place where Christ played in 10,000 places, right? Lovely in limbs and lovely in eyes, not his, to the Father through the features of men's faces. You encountered a living God, and in a very real way, and that could only call forth as best as we could, and as struggling through whatever failures I had, but call forth just a response of wonder and goodness and grace.
Let me just say one thing. Both of you have been great on showing up, wakes and funerals, celebrations, and I think that's kind of a core thing that both of you demonstrate so well. And people are so happy to come back on a jug night and to see you and to see one another. So it's that community, that sense of caring for one another that both of you have instilled in so many people. So thank you.
Probably good to end on that, right, Mike?
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. Colin Hanley, who wasn't able to unmute himself, his iPad's broken. It left a message for you both. But but on behalf of alumni relations, we want to thank everyone who joined us tonight, but especially to John and Jack for such wonderful insight, great stories, great memories, and just being the dedicated prep men that you are. You've made our institution the powerhouse that it is, and tonight is a testament to that. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks so much to everyone for
Thanks
being
for
here.
having us.
Take care, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Next time live and with drinks.
You're buying.
You're on.